If you're like me and you've been looking for an apartment the last couple months, you've realized it's unaffordable to get a nice place, or at least a bad place, for less than $1,200. Some would say it's the current economic state of inflation we're in, but this trend of people my age just starting adult life, not being able to pay rent and staying at home for a couple years is nothing new. When it comes down to it, it's not the fact that Gen Z doesn't want to launch from living at home, but the fact that they can't even get into orbit. Yes, inflation is high, but with other factors like student debt being ridiculous and the likelihood that the job you get probably won't pay you much and still will have you working 10 hours a day, you're bound to be living at home paying off or saving up. By the time you have enough to just get out of your parents' place, you'll be hit with a different reality. The reality of having to abide by a landlord or developer, which can be a good experience, but it also can be a severely bad one. Take no further than looking at the cities that were hit the hardest with raising rent. You soon realize many of the prices of apartments are not just due to inflation, but the fact that the developers are raising rates under the excuse of the current economic situation. A lot of my friends that live downtown Kansas City or around Kansas City have been telling me about a lot of these rent increases by like $300, which they can't even pay for because they are in college and they work like minimum wage jobs. And so it becomes kind of an issue when your landlord, who has the ability under Missouri law to just come up to you, give you a notice for $300 extra without a reason, and expect you to pay for it. So I took a look at the Missouri landlords and renters' responsibilities, and I didn't find anything egregious, no really huge abuses of power. There was kind of a weird legislation that allowed landlords to raise your rent just willingly without telling you, without a notice, which is kind of a problem, but it is a legal thing that I guess people have to deal with, and it's usually not a common occurrence unless there's really huge inflation. I mean, I'm sure there are some people that abuse that law, but for the most part, I think the issue in a lot of these renter issues is the fact that local government is really to blame for the fact that they don't really uphold these laws in court. Stonegate Meadows apartment complex is one incident of poor government intervention. The complex is host to Section 8 housing vouchers and is one of the only to do so in the KC metro area. By many accounts, a lot of people, especially recent immigrants, rely on this housing, and for many it was a good place to live. According to residents, the place used to be lively, but nowadays not so much, as things have turned for the worse. Around 2016, the complex started having big issues in the fact that mold started to grow in some unit showers, roaches were rampant, and faulty HVAC systems were common. Soon enough, the people that lived here started to file complaints to the health department.
There's a water heater, Raymond says, caught fire last week. Pipes, too, are busted in other parts of the building.
It's real hard because I can't wash them up, can't do nothing for them. If you ask for some water, I ain't got nothing but bottled water to give them. And that's, it's just very sad how people gotta live like this.
In response, city inspectors came out and inspected and found no violations during their first visit. After coming back to do another inspection, they found over 1,000. The city has tried to hold Stonegate accountable by Missouri landlord standards, but the problem is that the owners are a major LLC from New Jersey and are hard to get a hold of. Missouri representatives have tried to send letters and pass better tenant laws, but in the end, the only way to get a resolution to the damage of people's lives was to file a class action lawsuit, especially after the place caught on fire with no working fire alarms, resulting in people jumping off the second story to get away from being burned because they were late to evacuating. The lawsuit is still going on, but it has revealed something most people face, and that is the fact most of people's housing is owned by corporations that aren't even tied to the areas they live. This hurts non-Section 8 individuals as well, with the fact that many of their complexes are owned by foreign investors. While this might not be deduced to something totally bad since an appropriate relationship can occur, the idea of not having a local owner that owns housing can not only hurt tenants but also can hurt the landlord. No local management can lead to things like squatting, and this squatting can destroy neighborhoods and the value of other people's homes. It's nuanced to say the least, and the city can't intervene in removing the people off these private properties without the approval of the landlord, which in these situations can't even be reached.
But the city doesn't always have the power to do this, says KCPD officer Greg Smith.
We have to have consent to be on the property from the from the owner or the property manager, or we have to have a search warrant or some type of emergency circumstances.
Officer Smith says this part of town is particularly vulnerable to squatting.
There's just more vacant houses over here.
This decentralized approach has also allowed there to be a sort of easiness for landlords to raise rent. Take the Woodbridge Complex incident where the landlord was raising their tenants' rent by more than 5%, which was done under the fact that the apartments were exempt from price control. The issue is that this was a lie, as the exemption actually expired in 2004. The landlord was telling him that it expired in 2031, thinking that the majority retired population of the facility could pay the raises. Though this has actually put them into a bind, as many tenants brought the problem to the rent leveling board, where the board found that the two sections of the complex were built in two different phases, and because of that were given different exemptions, though these exemptions for control were only for 4 years. The board found that this was illegal and is forcing Woodbridge to reimburse all the victims affected by their actions. As much as these incidents of abuse have affected rent in many ways, not all of it is the landlord's fault, because sometimes it's renters that affect the market. You can say less people want to buy a home, but there's been a rise in my generation that wants to live alone in their own place. They're sick of roommates and parents, and this has definitely led to rising rates. Overall, I don't know if apartment prices or conditions surrounding them are going to get better. As we head to a recession or a housing market bust, people will lose jobs, foreclosure will happen, thus demand for apartments will rise. If it's anything, we need better laws for rent control and better communication and equal power for both landlord and renter.